Greater New York Academy welcomes you to our weekly chapel worship service, where we worship God in the beauty of holiness. Join us live on YouTube every Monday and Thursday. As we worship together, we are greater together.
And so forth. In the last year or so, people have just been either stuck at home and things like that. We know how it goes. And so today we'll be dealing with that a little bit today as well. So be ready for that. And I do hope that many of you filled in that Google document that was sent to you guys last night. I know a lot of you check Jupiter frequently, just like your social media platforms. You check your Jupiter frequently. And that's why a month later, some of you are asking, why have a 0 on that assignment? Because you don't check your Jupiter. But please, if you have not done so yet, if you have your iPad with you, go into that so you can fill it out. Because it is for today's chapel today, so do so. Okay? Pastor Alexander, while you're coming up here, guys, don't forget, this Saturday is what, guys? This Saturday is what? It's the concert, guys, our school concert. Raising money here for our students here at Greater. Guys, one thing I gotta understand, if we're raising money for you, you should be there. I mean, it doesn't make sense that you go, well, I couldn't make it. It's online. You have no excuse to miss it. It is about you. So make sure you are there. We can't see you, but thank you, Ms. Bovet. Send a link to your friends, your family, send it out there. All right, don't be embarrassed if you perform whatever it is. But this weekend, guys, is our concert on Saturday night. Guys, don't forget that this Monday, no school, Memorial Day weekend. All right? So please don't come to school on Monday. No one will be here. All right? Pastor, go ahead, sir.
All right, good morning, Greater. Morning, Greater. Okay. All right, so this is the second to last chapel before the school year ends. Next Thursday, the last chapel, will be our community award and recognition chapel. All right, on that day, I just need to prepare you. On that day, there will be some formalities, some pomp and circumstance. We are inviting organizations from this community, different entities that will be joining us. They will be acknowledged. They will receive some awards. And we will show our gratitude for them being a part of our community and impacting our schools specifically. So be prepared for that. If you're at home online, you need to tune into that, or you should come in, be a part of this. This is the first, I think. This is the first ever at Greater New York Academy in this capacity. So please come out. Everything will be safe. We follow all the protocols. And if you're here today, please come back next Thursday. There are some of you that will be participating. There's some of you that will have to be in Pathfinder uniform and all that thing. But God bless you. Thank you. Next Thursday is what? Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
The King is exalted on high. He is exalted. The King is exalted on high.
You may be seated. Now may everyone please bow their heads and close their eyes. May everyone please bow their heads and close their eyes for opening prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you that we're all alive and well today, Lord. Thank you that we're here during this chapel of mental health, Lord. Please let us be able to understand that you've given us the mind so that we can be able to take care of it and keep it healthy, Lord. Lord, the devil has done so much things to make us stressed out and make our minds go wild. So please let us dedicate this chapel into making our minds pure and clean in the way that you want us to be. Let us be able to look through you as a guide, and let us be able to understand that you've given us our minds in order for us to watch over it and in order for us to take care of it. So let us be able to learn through this chapel how to take care of our mentalities and our minds. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Good morning, everybody. Y'all know who I am. I'm Dusan. And today is the first of what we all hope to be an annual mental health day. Today's the day we're going to stop and we're going to think a bit about our mental health, because our mental health is just as important as our physical health. Okay? At this point in time, we would just like to get straight into our main event for today, the panel. And so I would like to ask Jaziel to come up with me, and then we would like to ask the psychologists to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Gewirtz.
Yeah, everyone can hear me. Okay, just thumbs up if I should go. You can hear me? Okay, excellent. All right, my name is Dr. Charles Gewirtz. You could call me Dr. Charles or Dr. G. Gewirtz is not the easiest last name to pronounce. And it's really a pleasure and privilege to be here today. And I want to say kudos to all of you, and especially the organizers, for wanting to take time to really talk about mental health. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, so I'm the director of the Behavioral Health Psychology Child and Adolescent Clinic at New York City Health and Hospitals, Queens, which is not too far from your school. It's in Jamaica, and basically we service children ages 4 through 18, and we'll get more to, I think, what type of services we provide, but basically anyone that's referred to us usually is having some challenge with their mental health, with their behaviors, with their thoughts and feelings. And we have many clinicians, both social workers, psychologists, and psychiatrists who provide medication if necessary to really help each individual and their family succeed and feel better, and to be able to hopefully not allow their mental health condition to get in the way as much of achieving their goals in life. So it's pretty much, it's a very fulfilling job for me. Half the time I spend actually providing treatment, providing psychotherapy to the children and adolescents. The other half of the time is more administrative, where I am supervising others and dealing with a lot of the technical aspects of how the clinic is run. So once again, it's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to have our discussion.
I believe we also have Miss B. No? Keep going. Okay, so we'll start off with our first question. We'll start off with our first question. This one is for you, Dr. Gewirtz. What tips can you give for healthy thinking?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I know part of the introduction about talking about trying to have a clear mind and a healthy mind, I think is really, I would say, everyone's goal in life. So obviously there are a lot of aspects to what go into the thoughts that people have, and part of what we try to do when we help children and adolescents in therapy is to really help them realize how their thoughts and their behaviors and feelings really all interact with one another. I think when it comes to having clear thinking and pure thoughts, I think it's important, number one, to recognize that even though we could try as best as we can to control what we think about, part of the human experience is to have what we call automatic thoughts. And there are thoughts that are going to come into our head, not just children. This is, throughout the lifespan. There are always going to be thoughts that pop into our head that we may be embarrassed about, may be ashamed of, that we don't want to be having. And I think step one in terms of trying to purify one's thoughts and to try to help the way we think is to recognize that automatic thoughts are automatic, and a lot of times they're out of our control. So I think what really the work that's involved in trying to change the way we think is not necessarily trying to change the automatic thought, because that, again, part of human nature is that thoughts will pop into our head when they're not wanted, and they're maybe not the healthiest way of thinking about things. But what we can do is, after we have that automatic thought, we could start to evaluate the thought and think about, is this really a helpful thing to be thinking about? Is this really the right way of thinking about it? Is this, way of thinking, this automatic thought that popped into my head, is this going to help me? Is this in line with my goals, or is this not in line with my goals? So just to give a concrete example, so a person, let's say, is about to perform. You're about to perform music in front of a crowd. You're about to speak in front of your class, to do a presentation. And when it's getting closer to your turn, the automatic thoughts that come in are, I'm going to be so bad, it's going to be terrible, I'm going to embarrass myself in front of the class, right? So that's the automatic thought. No one invited that thought in, just kind of popped in automatically. So you can't control that. That happened already. But then the question is, okay, so what do I do with that thought? Do I believe it and say, oh, yeah, that thought is really right, I'm going to embarrass myself, it's going to be terrible? Or do you say, okay, that was my automatic thought, but let's see if that's accurate. I've presented a number of times before. I've gotten positive feedback. Even if I mess up, I'll be able to survive, won't be the worst thing. So you're able to kind of talk back to that automatic thought and then be able to proceed in a way that's, if you follow that automatic thought, you would just be very stressed and maybe even run out of the room and not perform. But when you could rethink it and you could challenge that way of thinking, that's what allows us to then achieve our goals. So there's a kind of a lot more to say about this, but that's kind of my general approach of how I address this question of how we could help the way we think in a more helpful manner. I hope that at least partly answered the question.
Thank you very much, sir. We have our next question, Jaziel.
All right, for our next question, if I feel an anxiety attack coming on, is it preventable?
Also a very good question. So I think the first part of that is to really distinguish between what we call a panic attack and anxiety attack. A panic attack is a very scary experience. Anyone here who's had a panic attack could probably attest to this. Panic attacks usually don't last very long. It's not physically possible for the body to handle a long-term panic attack. So usually the most is that it's a couple of minutes, and it's very scary because it feels like the person is having a heart attack. A lot of times a teenager will end up in the emergency room because they think, God forbid, they were having a heart attack, And really, it wasn't a medical condition in the sense of a heart issue or a blood pressure issue. It was a panic attack, but it feels like it. The heart could get very tense. A person could get very stiff, difficulty breathing, hyperventilating, getting very sweaty. So that's a panic attack. An anxiety attack is also uncomfortable, but not to the degree of a panic attack. Anxiety could also include some of the same symptoms, but much lighter. So it could involve some difficulty breathing. It could involve sweating. It could involve having racing thoughts, worrying, but it's not at the level of this very intense panic attack. So I think to answer the question, I'll try to address both. I think if a person does feel like they're having a full-blown panic attack coming on, that was the first thing that I was describing. I think one of the things to really keep in mind, and this is something that we try to help teenagers with if they're in therapy with us, is that the more that you worry about having it, the more likely it is to come on, which is kind of this paradox that's unhelpful, because usually what happens is the person will have one sensation. Let's say their heart starts beating fast. So let's say they start to feel a little bit floaty. So that one sensation now will turn the brain on into danger mode, that, oh no, something terrible is about to happen. And then what do you think happens next? The body reacts to that. The body gets in, what we call fight or flight modes. The body gets worked up more. And then the brain says, oh, see, I told you, here it comes, it's getting worse. And then the body just, so you could see how it just perpetuates itself. So one of the most effective ways of managing panic attacks and preventing them is actually to notice what are those first signs and to talk yourself out of the fact that it's going to be a disaster. It doesn't have to be a disaster. Okay, I'm feeling this way, but it doesn't have to be a full-blown panic attack. And even if it is, I'll be able to handle it. So the way that you talk to yourself about it actually is more likely to prevent it from becoming a full-blown panic attack. So again, these are things that if it's really a struggle for individuals, that's when I think psychotherapy could really help. To kind of go through these steps. I kind of crunched it into 2 minutes, but to really go through these steps to help prevent panic attacks could be very helpful to be in psychotherapy. In terms of an anxiety attack, I would say part of it is the same. If it starts with the body sensation, to be able to tell yourself that it doesn't mean that it's going to get worse, and even if it does, I'll be able to handle it. But I think the more mainstream anxiety, going back to some of the other things I was talking about before, about how could I think about this differently? Maybe I'm what we call catastrophizing. Maybe my brain is turning this into some terrible thing that's going to happen, and that's why my body's reacting that way, when maybe it's actually not as bad as my brain is perceiving. So that's one way of addressing it, by talking to yourself in that way. And the other way is just taking care of your own physical state. So sometimes taking some really slow breaths could be helpful. But I should add that, a lot of times anyone here who's had a panic attack, one of the most annoying things to hear is just calm down, take some deep breaths. Because once you're in it, it's actually very hard, if not impossible, to calm down and take a deep breath. So once you're at the point of panic, it's very hard to slow it down. But before it gets there, it definitely helps to do some very slow breathing, do some mindfulness activities, close your eyes, some meditation, religious activities could be helpful, prayer, things like that. So there are things to do for your body, not just in terms of changing your thoughts.
What does it mean to not care at all?
What does it mean to not care at all? I just want to make sure I heard that right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear it. I'm sorry. Can you say the question one more time?
What does it mean to not care at all?
To not care at all. So I would have to ask a follow-up question, because I don't necessarily know that means the same thing to everyone. I've had different teenagers tell me that, younger kids tell me that, and there's not always one clear answer. So it definitely depends. I think I would want to just question and maybe get to know a little bit more about what the person means by that. Um, but I would say in a common scenario, don't care at all could be a sign of depression, if it's ongoing, if it's like day after day after day of not caring at all, or it could be just having a moment or having a day of feeling sad and less motivated. Because when I hear I don't care at all, a lot of times what I think that means is I don't feel motivated. That even though there are things that are meaningful in my life, I don't feel that motivation to be able to work on achieving those goals. So if that's the case, I think that's when therapy definitely could be helpful in terms of trying to figure out what's getting in the way of that motivation. But sometimes it's a biological thing. Sometimes depression does run in families, and even if it doesn't run in a family, anyone could be suffering from depression, and that's something that definitely should be addressed with some treatment. Doesn't have to always be long term forever treatment. It could be a couple of months, whether it's through medication or whether it's through therapy. And the most evidence there is in terms of treating depression, or if a person is just kind of chronically not caring about things, is what we call CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. Just to give a very brief idea of what that is. So cognitive means the thoughts. So that's addressing some perhaps underlying beliefs. So let's say the person has an underlying belief that no matter how much they try, they're not gonna succeed. So part of the therapy, part of the treatment will be to really try to undo that belief and to maybe explore what that belief is based on, and to see if we could change that belief the person has about themselves. That's the cognitive piece. And the behavioral piece is to actually start doing more. There's something called behavioral activation, which is really a fancy way of saying, even if you don't feel like doing something, do it. And then you'll end up feeling better, right? Because usually we like to think of, if I feel like doing it, I'll do it. If I don't feel like doing it, I won't do it. But when a person is in a state of depression, it kind of has to be the other way. It has to be, even though I don't feel like doing it, I'm going to do it anyway because I know it's something that's meaningful to me. And then once I start doing, then I'll start feeling better. And I'm sure we all can relate to this somewhat. If you're in a bad mood, all you want to do is do nothing. You want to just kind of go under your covers and just be on your phone. But does that actually help? Usually not. Usually just kind of we wallow in our feeling bad. So if we kind of force ourselves to say, you know what, even though I want to go onto the covers, I'm going to choose to go for a walk. I'm going to choose to meet a friend somewhere. That usually is what's helpful when you feel that way.
Thank you, sir. Jaziel?
What are some of the modern tools or ideas you could have that could help us to deal with traumatic memories and how to overcome them?
Yeah, so also very good question. I think that this also depends on the severity of the traumatic memories. You might be aware there's a mental health condition called post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's a very difficult condition to be living with. It's really gets in the way of one's everyday functioning, and that's when there are these traumatic experiences, and that could be either a one-time event. It could be a car accident, or it could be kind of a chronic situation, an ongoing maybe childhood experiences for a couple of years where someone was moving around from different families, didn't have consistent caregivers. So there are a lot of different types of trauma that a person could experience that may lead to PTSD. And I want to be clear that it doesn't have to lead to PTSD. Sometimes we have more resilience than we realize, and a person could go through a lot of difficult events and difficult experiences, but it won't necessarily lead to PTSD. But when it does, and a person's having flashbacks of these experiences, which are very uncomfortable, sometimes the whole person's whole body could feel as if they're re-experiencing it. Even though it's 10 years later, your body could re-experience it in such a way that leads you to avoid certain things. So if there was some traumatic event that involved, a certain area of I'm just making this up, a certain area of Queens. So then the effect on that person could be they just want to avoid that whole area of Queens, because anytime they go there, it brings up some of those emotions. So how to deal with these thoughts? I think if it's to the extent where it really is getting in the way of one's functioning, like in that example, like they're avoiding a certain place, then that's really bothering them. It's really getting in their way, or it's hard for them to have stable relationships, maybe because of the flashback. So I think if it's really getting in the way of functioning, I think therapy is probably indicated. And one of the most effective forms of treatment for trauma is what we call TFCBT. So again, it's similar to what I was talking about before, but it's trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's really being able to get to know oneself better in terms of one's triggers, what causes the trauma feelings to come up, and then very gradually, slowly, one step at a time, you start to face those fears more, and then ultimately you're able to really talk out what happened, even though that sounds so painful and so difficult. The more that you could actually put to words what happened in this form of treatment, and again, it's very step by step, so it's not like the first session you're like, okay, tell me everything that happened, because as we know, it could be very difficult to actually put to words. But eventually, when a person gets to that point where they're able to put to words, either in verbal form or in written form, and then just allow it to be out of the system, that could really allow a person to feel somewhat relieved. It's not going to make the memories go away, right? It doesn't. Our brain is very strong, and it remembers a lot. So you can't just press a button or take a pill and forget things that happened. But through talking about it in a safe manner, gradually will allow a person to be able to move on and not have it get in the way as much. And just to mention, because you asked, I think the way the question was framed is what modern day treatment. So that is, I would say, is one of the more classic treatments. But there are some very good technological advances, like using, like, I don't know if you guys have the Oculus or some sort of virtual reality devices at home, but those are actually being used very frequently now for people who are trying to overcome trauma, and especially war veterans that are traumatized from things that they experienced through battle, etc. So through virtual reality and being able to kind of go there a bit more and re-experience some of those scary experiences, that actually is able to help heal as well. So it's not just through talking about it and writing about it, but technology has allowed, through virtual reality and some of these other things, to actually be able to re-experience it in a more visual way, which is also proven to be effective.
Thank you, sir. That was a very comprehensive answer. Our next question is, what are some long and short-term impacts COVID can have on teens?
Yeah, so it's how much time do you have? I mean, this is COVID really had an impact on not just teens, but really everyone. But to kind of frame it for teens, I think one important developmental experience, one I would say key hallmark of being an adolescent and a teenager is social connectedness, identity formation, really trying to find one's place amongst society, right, amongst others. And I think when COVID came and really, I think, separated us as a society in more than one way, but I'm just focusing maybe now on just like the physical separation and not being able to be, physically, socially connected to others. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, because I think what happened is we over relied on the technology connectedness. And I'm definitely not here to bash technology. There's so many pluses of social media. There's so many benefits of social media and really all type of technology. But I think, sorry, one second. I couldn't see. Were you trying to get my attention? Sorry, can you lift it up a little bit higher?
You have all the time you need, sir.
Just want to make sure I'm getting the message. Good? Okay. So I think the fact that we have that we had to over rely on technology, on phones, to connect to others, I think that definitely had an impact on teenagers because again, teenagers really want to develop their social life. They want to be able to go out, hang out with friends, go to school. So I think that the fact that we had to use technology so much is a challenge because number one, it didn't allow for I think the full social development that is kind of appropriate for this age because we have less opportunity for the live interactions. And I think also honestly, there's often more hurt that happens over social connections than would have happened over live connections. I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but you know what people say and text over the phone and over social media, a lot of times they would never do live. So I think there's also that danger that when we're I think communicating more over social media, there's more potential for cyberbullying and people to be hurt and feel more isolated. Even though it may feel good that I'm in a chat with 20 other people, there's I think more risk for isolation. So I think the good news is that first of all we're coming back out more and more, thankfully, and I think that we could use that opportunity and that experience of what it was like to have to be separated to appreciate more and take advantage more of the social connectedness. I would say just one other impact of COVID is, and this is related to that, but I think teenagers also naturally have a more challenging time sometimes with emotions, and I think that there was for some there might have been a heightened comfort of not having to go out to school, not having to interact because maybe they're more anxious about those things, but that isn't necessarily the best thing to just avoid having to interact. I think sometimes when we avoid, that just kind of has it sit more inside. So I'm finding that some teenagers are even having a hard time kind of coming back because they were very used to not having to deal with the drama and the challenges that come with being back at school, being back live. So I think from a social and emotional standpoint, there were challenges, but there's a lot more to say, but I want to make time for other questions.
Very much, sir. We are about to have our last question. Jaziel, go ahead.
For our last question, what are some of the steps I should take if I find myself experiencing suicidal thoughts? And what do I do if I'm having suicidal thoughts, but I can't report it because of some reason?
Oh yeah, so that's a really, really important question. And unfortunately, you might know the rate of suicide is actually going up a lot in teenagers, in adolescents. So this is a very real issue. It's something that I'm happy that someone asked it because it's a very real issue and I think has to be discussed and addressed. I think that, first of all, it's important to recognize that it's very normal to have suicidal type thoughts. And I think that often teenagers and adolescents have a certain shame and there's a certain, embarrassment when they have thoughts like that. And that's part of why they don't want to tell anyone. So I think number one is to realize that it's much more common than you think. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you're in danger or you're actually planning to do something just because you're having suicidal thoughts. There's a whole category of suicidal thoughts, what we call passive ideation, which doesn't mean that there's an active plan of, I'm planning on doing something to end my life. It's more morbid type thinking. It's like, I really wish I was dead, or I really wouldn't mind if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning. So those are not dangerous per se, but also important to address and also important to be able to share. So for those two types of thoughts, the more passive ideation and the more active, I would say most adolescents have those thoughts pretty frequently. So it's really important to realize that there shouldn't be a shame. And I think the more we talk about it, sometimes that, stops the stigma, and to recognize that it's very normal. And I think that's number one, to realize that it is very common, and it should be something that people feel comfortable talking about. And on the other end, I think staff and the grown-ups, are realizing more and more that it doesn't always have to be this intense reaction. If a teenager is sharing that they're having some morbid thoughts, wishing they were dead, but no active plan. So that doesn't mean you have to go straight to the emergency room. It doesn't mean that we have to ramp it up. That just means that maybe we should get some extra counseling or being able to talk to more supports. So I think that's a very important piece. And then the other piece of, if we're having active suicidal thoughts, like, actually having a plan, and really thinking about, how I might kill myself. So first of all, to know that's also common, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. But that's when I think there has to be some more treatment. I think some more help. And again, it doesn't have to be coming to ongoing therapy. It could be talking to a guidance counselor, talking to a teacher that you trust about it. But again, if there is a concern for risk, that there's a concern the person might actually harm themselves in some way, I think that's when we try to get the appropriate treatment. And it's important to know that after some time in therapy and being able to figure out what's underlying these thoughts, what's underlying some of my emptiness, some of my sad feelings, that could be a couple of months, and then a person feels better. So there shouldn't be a feeling that, oh, if I tell someone, then I'm going to have to go to therapy and go to treatment. I'm going to be there forever. People are going to think I'm crazy. It really, I think our society, I mean, we still have a way to go, but our society is realizing more and more that it doesn't mean we're crazy. It doesn't mean there's something, that's terribly wrong with us. It means that we're struggling, and we need some extra support to help us find our way, and find that, desire to live more. And I think it's really up to all of you to have the radar up, both for yourselves and for each other. If you are concerned about a classmate, and there's a real risk concern, or even if you're not sure, it may be worth it to tell someone. It may be worth it to address it. But I think if we create a culture where it's okay to talk about it and people aren't shamed for talking about it, I think that would go a very long way in people feeling more comfortable, sharing and seeking the help that they need.
Thank you very much, sir, for coming today and carving time out here to speak with us. I'd like to thank you all for coming and participating today. I would like to thank Dr. Gewirtz once again, who carved time out of his day just to come and talk to us. I would like to thank the praise team, Mr. Romaine, Mr. McDonald. You all did a very good job. I'd like to thank the teachers and especially Mr. Patterson for allowing this to happen, because this is important as well. And I'd like to thank you guys for just being here, because without y'all, none of this would have been possible. I now turn it over to Mr. Patterson or Mr. S.
All right, you're off. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to just add one quick thing. I added my email address to the chat.
All right. Thank you again, freshman class, for bringing this to our attention. Like I said, first time since I've been here at Greater, we're doing something like this, so much appreciated. Announcements, guys, real quick. Just let you know, there's lunch, right? We come back, all right? We have school today. This is the third and fourth period, so don't wander off. We still have class, so don't forget that. Freshmen, by the way, you're going to come in to my third period class this afternoon, all right? So all freshmen, you're gonna be coming to my third period class this afternoon. The sophomores look confused. That's okay. It's mental health day. We'll work with you guys, all right? All right. If I'll get a time real quick, I have a word of prayer, and we'll get a time. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for today. Thank you for allowing this chapel to take place, Lord. knowing that our minds are not simple things, Lord, something that you created for us that have a lot of complexities to it. But Lord, knowing if we can keep you in sight, that's definitely a bonus in our lives. Be with us as we go out for lunch. Bless the food that can be blessed. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. The time is 12:52. All right, 12:52. My beautiful seniors who are here, wake up Michael and... Or leave them. Go ahead, juniors. And sophomores, be gone. Not be late, people. And then